Okay, this morning we're continuing in our study of Judges, where the text is actually chapters 13 through 16, with a focus on part of that. But this week we're talking about Samson, one of the better known judges, I guess you might say. And he mentions in our intro here that Samson's a bit of an enigma. Some people look at him almost like a comic book superhero, and then some people look at him as just a tragic example of man because of his potential and what he did with it. But we're going to look through this today, and he was a man that God wanted to use. He's a man that God intended to use. He's a man that God did use. And we're going to look through this, and we're going to see just how that was. We're going to pick up with Judges 13:5. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. And he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So this was a time, once again, the Israelites had gone wayward away from God, and God was raising up a judge to help them, to help them to conquer the Philistines. So you had Samson's parents, Manoah and, I'm sorry, I forget his mother's name. Bottom line was, they had no children. She was barren, so they thought. And an angel of the Lord came to her and told her that she was going to conceive a child. You know, it's interesting. We're going to see this happen again later. An angel of the Lord, well, it had happened with Abraham and Sarah, and we're going to, anyway. So here is again someone who's not able to have children. The angel of the Lord comes to him and says, you're going to conceive a child. And he's explaining to him what you're going to do and how you're going to do. He tells her first that you're not going to consume anything of the vine. So no wine, no grapes, no raisins, no anything that grows on a grapevine. You don't consume any of that. And not only you don't consume that, your child shall not consume that. And a Nazarite is not a person from Nazareth, like Jesus was from Nazareth. A Nazarite is someone that's set aside, or almost, I wouldn't say a covenant with God, but a pledge maybe to God. And sometimes it's for a short period of time, a year or two, and sometimes it's for life. Samson was a Nazarite for life. Samuel was a Nazarite for life. John the Baptist was a Nazarite for life. And some of the things about them is, one, they don't consume anything of the vine, they don't cut their hair or trim their beards, and they don't touch a dead body. That's three of the rules that we are aware of, that we know, and that we're going to talk about here today. But it's also interesting to see that he says, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. I thought that was kind of interesting, because Samson is not going to actually deliver the Israelites, but he's going to set into motion things that will deliver the Israelites from the Philistines' bondage at this particular time. It mentions too here in our text when we're reading through this, I mentioned the potential of Samson. So here's a person that's set aside by God. And the angel came and spoke to his mother and said, you're going to bear a child. And she went and told her husband. And they went and prayed that he would come back and explain things a little bit more to him. And he did. And to the mother. And then she came and told her husband again. And he went back out into the field. And he was there, and they talked a bit. And then Samson's father built a little altar and did a little grain and a little offering there, and I think it was a goat maybe that he killed and offered up. And then the angel of the Lord, as the smoke was going up, the angel of the Lord just ascended back into heaven along with the smoke, just to show them, to give them affirmation of what's being told to them and what's that. And so they raise up Samson in this way. And they raise him up and tell him what's expected of him, and that God has a plan for him. And God's going to use him. And he totally ignores this. He did not respect the restrictions of his vows. You're going to find that one time he found himself in a vineyard. Well, he was in a vineyard among the vines, among the grapes, and I'm not saying that he was there necessarily drinking wine, but he found himself someplace that's surrounded by things that he's not to partake of. Whether he was eating, I don't know, maybe he would get hungry. And, well, there's some grapes, I'll just eat them, it won't hurt anything. Or anything. But you know you're not supposed to do this. You know you're not supposed to partake of this. So don't put yourself there. Don't let yourself, don't find yourself in something that will tempt you. Don't let you find yourself somewhere where Satan can just tell you, oh, you know what? It's just a few grapes. It's no big deal. Just eat them. You're hungry. You're thirsty. It'll solve both things at one time. Big juicy grapes, you know, it'll quench your thirst and stave off your hunger all at one time. Just go ahead and eat them. It's okay.
Sounds like Eve.
Yeah. to get some knowledge, yeah. But we can find ourselves there too. We know we ought not do this, or we know we ought not do that, and it's not going to hurt anything. The next thing you know, Satan's using that and tempting us to partake of something that we shouldn't, that we know we shouldn't. So he saw a pretty girl one day. He told his dad, he said, I want her for a wife. And she was a Philistine. Well, what were the Israelites not to do? They were not to marry a Philistine. But that's what he wanted. This is a guy that has been told from birth, God's got something special for you. So, I don't know, lets it go to his head, does his own thing, does whatever. But he said here in our text, he did things his own way, which eventually led to his destruction. How could God use a man like this as a judge in Israel? Well, that's what you begin to wonder, because when you read down through all the different things he said, we'll pick up in 15, 14, and 15. And when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed off from his hands. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. Samson had taken this wife, this Philistine, for his wife. And during the celebration, I'm sure just a recap, but during the celebration, he had this, on the way there, he had killed a lion with his bare hands, ripped his jaws apart. And then that was when he was going to meet his future wife. When he came back for the wedding, he went and looked, and he saw that carcass of that lion that he had killed had been eaten somewhat, but some bees had formed a hive in there, and there was some honey inside the lion. And he reached down there and got him a handful of the honey, ate something sweet. Well, then he's at this celebration for his wedding, and his father-in-law had chosen 30 Philistines to be his buddies, to be his running buddies, basically. And so he had this riddle for him. Well, his new wife came to him after a few days, and they couldn't figure out the riddle, because had they figured out the riddle, they were all going to get a nice new set of clothes. And if they don't, they've got to all give him a nice new set of clothes. And he'd have 30 nice new sets of clothes. It's quite expensive. His wife starts nagging on him or whatever, but she's getting all embarrassed, because these are her people that she grew up with, and he's making a mockery of them. And he finally gets tired of listening to it, so he tells her the secret to his riddle, and she goes and tells them, and then they come and tell him, and he gets mad because they figured it out. She told him the truth. And so instead of him, I doubt that he had the money to buy 30 nice new sets of clothes, he goes down to this town that was on the coast that I don't exactly remember, but he already had ill feelings towards them, because he was of the tribe of Dan. And the tribe of Dan had never got settled in their allotted land because they were being harassed by these Philistines. So he was already mad at this town and the people of this town. So he just goes down there and kills 30 of them and takes their clothes and brings them back and says, here. And he got mad at his wife, and so he left. He went back home with his parents because he was mad that she had gave up his secret, gave up his answer to his riddle, but he paid his debt. And so then after a while, he gets to missing her, so he's going to go back. And he gets back to get her, and her father says, well, I thought you didn't love her. I thought you gave up, so I gave her as a wife to your best man. So now, here, and so he gets mad, and he goes and kills some more Philistines, and he goes and he's in a cave, and the Philistines who are ruling the area, they go to the Israelites and they tell them, say, look, you should take this guy and turn him over to us, or we're gonna just cause pain to all of you. We're gonna kill all of you, or whatever. However whatever they're gonna do. So they went to him and they told him, said, look, for the good of us, our people and all, we've got to turn you over to the Philistines. So they tied him up, they led him back to camp, to the army camp of the Philistines, and they said, here you go, here he is. And he immediately, that's what he says here, he immediately ripped off the flax, broke the cords, broke the ropes, and he picked up a jawbone of a mule that had just died, and he took that jawbone and he killed 1,000 Philistine soldiers. And what we're seeing here, though, is him breaking this vow of a Nazirite. Not supposed to touch a dead body. He killed this lion, and then he goes back and finds later that there's honey, a hive of honey in this. Again, is this Satan tempting him? I would say so. He's tired, he's hungry. Well, something sweet would really be nice right here. Oh, look there, there's some honey. Now, who would have thought that a hive of bees would be in the carcass of a lion? But they were. Because Satan can do some strange things here on this earth as well. He can tempt us with some peculiar things. And that's what he gave into. He had to touch this dead body in order to satisfy his sweet tooth here. So again, he's given in. He's not following his vows from God. He's given in. When he picks up the jawbone of it was a newly killed mule, or as it says in the text, if you read that, it was freshly killed. So he's touching a dead body again, picking that up. Again, breaking his vows. It says he describes our author of the text describes Samson as a braggart, a gambler, a trickster, a swindler, a thief, and demeaning to women. He even called his wife a heifer, the one that gave up her secret and everything. He's not a nice person. He's not doing what a man of God you would think should do or would do. It says, too often we ignore the ungodliness in such people because we're mesmerized by their physical talents. We're talking about Samson, and we're talking about people today. We too often get to looking at folks. This guy pledged, his parents pledged, and he's pledged himself to be a man of God. We see people today that we lift up as examples in society, that we lift up as someone to look up to. And it's because of the entertainment that they give us. It's not because of what they do for people, what they do for God, what they do to expand the kingdom of God, but it's what they do to what we think makes our life more pleasurable. Whether it's watching a football game or watching a musician, or you just pick it, anything you want to. Politicians, you name it. We look at them and say, oh my, that's exactly what I think. That's what I like what they're doing there. I love that game. I love that team. whatever. And yet, the true example that they're living in their life is contrary to God's will for our lives. You can just look and see that they're not the example we should be looking up to. He said, the sad truth about Samson is God did use Samson to defeat the Philistines, but God used Samson in his wickedness and not in his righteousness. So Samson's killing Philistines, and it's going to help deliver the Israelites, but he's doing it what we would probably look at and say is the wrong way. So we're going to look at Delilah and Samson's demise here. There's a lot of verses here, but just stick with me. It said, and it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. Okay, the Philistines, there was 5 major cities. You know, we talked about this. There were kings scattered all over the place, but they were just like kings of a little area there. There were 5 major cities of the Philistines, and they had their own little kings. And that's what these 5 came to Delilah and said, look, this guy's a thorn in our side. This guy, how many Philistines has he already killed? You find out what the secret is to his strength, because it would say in there that the Spirit of the Lord would come upon him, and he just displayed incredible strength. And so these guys came to Delilah and told her, we'll give each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver if you'll find out what his secret is, so that we can take him down. I've seen different estimates of how much money that is in today's, but 5,500 pieces of silver. The pieces of silver they're talking about is actually about a half a troy ounce for each piece. So you're looking at 2,750 troy ounces of silver. And today's price is $20 an ounce. So I've seen some people say $100,000. Well, I guess silver must have been a little higher then. But at today's price, it's around $55,000. She was going to sell him out for a tidy sum to move along and get herself set up somewhere. Probably more money than she could ever imagine having in her lifetime. So they've offered her up this, each of them. And it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death. So the verses we skipped out there on, she went to him and she said, what is your secret to your strength? And he said, well, if you tie me up in this kind of rope, I can't do anything about it. So she tied him up and called to the men and said, oh, Samson, they're here to get you. The Philistines have come to attack you. And he ripped the cords and killed those guys. And then she'd pout and be sad, and she'd say, well, you lied to me. You didn't tell me the truth. And what really is it? And he'd say, well, if you did this, if you tied me up with this kind of rope. So the same story, same thing. Oh, Samson, they're coming to get you. Ripped the cords, killed the guys. And the 5 heads of those cities were starting to kind of doubt what was going on, because they sent people 3 times. And each time, Samson killed the folks that came after him. And so she just went on, and that's what it said, until his soul was vexed unto death. This is, again, we already know that Samson can't put up with nagging women. And this one's nagging him to the point where he would just rather die than to keep hearing it. So to get her to hush and to leave him alone, no offense to anybody, this is how the story went. I'm not saying that women nag, I'm just saying that he thought she was nagging. He told her, it's my hair. If I was to have my hair cut off, I've got 7 braids. If they were to be cut off, I would lose all my strength. That he told her unto his heart, and he said unto her, there hath not come a razor upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, and then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came upon her and brought money into their hand. So they've come back with their money. She says, I got it this time. I know the secret. So they're going to give her one more shot. And she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep, and said, I will go out as other times before, and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord departed from him. The Lord was departed from him. So he did not have that strength, because he realized his hair was gone. But the Philistines took him, and put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with fetters of brass. He'd gone to Gaza once before, and got where they tried to catch him and got so aggravated, he ripped the gates off the city so they couldn't be locked up, and carried them 40 miles away to, I think, to Hebron. The guy was strong, and they took him right back to Gaza where he had done all this before. And they bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. So they took him and gave him a job that we were just at Silver Dollar City. I don't know a lot of y'all have seen this, where you take a mule, and they were making sorghum. So they had the cane, and they were running it through the press, and they had a mule walking around in circles, running that. And if you don't have a grist mill, a water wheel to run that, they would take a mule and to grind the corn with. And so they would have the millstones, and they'd just have a mule walk around and around in circles and running the grindstones. Well, that's what they have Samson doing. They got him grinding corn without any sight. They gouged out his eyes. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. So his hair starts growing. He probably starts thinking about this. They weren't smart enough to go in there and shave his head every day. They didn't understand exactly what he had talked about. He didn't have any hair from the time he was born, so maybe that took care of it. They don't know. You would have thought maybe they'd just take precaution and we'll just go ahead and shave it every day. But they didn't. And he's thinking, my hair's growing out. You don't know exactly what he's thinking. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, Our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. So they're having this great big party, big gathering. And they marched Samson out as a prize to show off. Their temples for Dagon were also doubled as like theaters or whatever. Huge facilities. There's people on the roof. There's people down below watching. I don't know how many people are here, but it's over 1,000. A lot of folks there having a big party, talking about their conquest and what great people they are, how smart, how intelligent, how wonderful they are. Look what our God Dagon has done for us. He's delivered us Samson, our enemy. They think the only person that could take them down was Samson. They have no thought of how God can take them down. And so they're bragging, they're showing off. They got Samson out there. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me. So they had walked him out, and he asked the people that walked him, I guess they were probably not the smartest of the group, but he asked them to put me between the pillars that are holding up the building. Let me stand between these pillars so I can hold myself up. And they fell for it. So here he is standing between the two main pillars that are holding this building up. And now he's praying to God to remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee. Only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. So he's forgetting about himself so much but he's asking God to give him strength. He knows his hair's growing back a little bit, but he's starting to realize where his strength came from. And he's asking God to give me strength to do this. And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars upon which the house stood, and upon which it was borne up, of the one to his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon the people that were there within. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. So he killed a few thousand Philistines here. He's beginning to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines by taking these down. These would have been the upper crust of the Philistines. God's will was accomplished. He defeated the Philistines with Samson. He says here in our text, maybe Samson had broken his Nazarite vow so many times he did not really think it mattered anymore. He likely thought his strength came from himself. He was invincible, and his strength did not depend upon a vow made to the Lord. But oh, how he was wrong. But he realizes it here at the end. His strength came from God, not from any vow that he took, not from anything that he did about his body, not anything about not cutting his hair. Those things tend to point you in the right direction is what the intent was. Don't cut my hair because I've made a vow to God. And so I look at my reflection in the river, in the creek, in the water or whatever. I don't know that they necessarily have mirrors everywhere, but he'd see his reflection. And his beard's growing long and his hair's growing long. Yeah, I know why that is. Because I made a vow to God. I'll never cut my hair. I'll never trim my beard. Because I'm a man of God. This is what a man of God looks like. I'm doing what has been told of me. But he didn't think that. He was thinking that he was doing all this, killing all these Philistines of his own might and his own ability. And he realized here at the end that he didn't. So what do we learn from Samson? God used an immoral, ungodly man to weaken the Philistines so that Israel would be freed from its oppression. I stand amazed at how God could take a man like Samson and fulfill his purposes. It speaks more of the greatness of God and less about the life of Samson. Samson is an example of wasted potential. Samson went wrong at the start when he disobeyed his godly parents, ignored the law of God, and married a Philistine woman. His decline continued as he repeatedly disregarded his Nazarite vow to the Lord. He had the potential to be a man like Samuel or John the Baptist, but instead he became a man of self-indulgence and personal vengeance, totally ignoring God's call on his life. In the end, he was humiliated and defeated by his own sin. Yes, we see how God used Samson to accomplish his will, but this is no justification for the way Samson lived. God used Judas Iscariot to betray the Lord and hand him over to be crucified, but that was no justification for Judas's betrayal either. For the Lord himself said, "The Son of Man goeth as is written of him, but woe unto the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. And it has been good for that man if he had not been born." The Lord will accomplish his will in all our lives, but may it not be in our wickedness, but in our righteousness. God's going to accomplish his will, whatever it is, and he has a work for each of us. But we want to be sure that we're accomplishing that will in the right manner, following God. Samson was just like the Israelites. I'm with God and I turn away from God. I'm with God, I'm on board, and then I'm off. The Israelites were doing that just continually. And that's the way Samson was. Samson's secret strength was not his hair, like we said, but in his following of God's will. As long as he followed God's will, as long as he understood it was God giving him the strength, things would be okay. Things would be well. As long as we're following God's will and understanding that we're able to accomplish God's will, not of our own ability, but of God's strength that he gives to us, then it's going to be all right. But when we get to thinking that oh, look what I did here. Look at this. You know, what a great accomplishment I did.